Hi, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well today. This is the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour. Hi, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well today. This is the Canadian I'm coming to you from, I'm Eve Engler. I'm coming to you from Jojage, which has long been a meeting place of various First Nations, otherwise known as Montreal. And I have a hard 7 o'clock out, so I'm going to try to get right to developments in Canadian foreign policy. Just today, the Auditor General released a report that the Globe and Mail correspondent in Africa, Jeffrey York, cited that talks about Canada's so-called feminist international policy. And it says, the Auditor General says, quote, "We concluded that Global Affairs Canada was unable to demonstrate how Canada's feminist international assistance policy contributed to improving gender equality in low and middle income countries. Significant weaknesses in Global Affairs Canada's information management practices prevented it from assessing outcomes and reporting completely to Parliament and Canadians." So apparently the feminist international assistance policy, even on their own terms, is not able to show that it's actually fulfilling what it says it's doing. That's not a surprise to me and probably to people watching, listening, because of course this is mostly a public relations endeavor, and their whole feminist foreign policy is a public relations endeavor. When they're giving money, a $15 million contract to the Haitian police, and they call it feminist international assistance policy, that speaks to how, you know, they can kind of label whatever they want to label feminist international assistance policy. But it's interesting to see that the Auditor General has actually specifically cited that and shows the government's not able to prove what it says it's the good works it says it's doing. And then there's also of course a whole question of Canadian aid policy more generally, and what that's all about, which is not necessarily the claims that they make in terms of actually getting impoverished people out of their difficult state, but in fact is about advancing geostrategic and corporate interests. A good article, academic article in the Canadian Journal of Development Studies that was published a couple of days ago that delves into an element of this. It's titled "Mining Self-Interest, Canadian Foreign Aid and the Extractive Sector in Mongolia" by Stephen Brown. And it basically shows that, and he interviews a whole bunch of Canadian officials in Mongolia, that the aid project in Mongolia, at the end of the Harper government, they announced Mongolia would be part of their 25 priority countries for Canadian aid. It shows that the aid project in Mongolia is almost entirely about advancing Canadian mining interests. All these relations between local community organizations and mining companies funded by Canadian aid. And that the overarching concern is resource nationalism, and that their protesters, Mongolians, were demanding greater share of the resources. They were complaining about the ecological damage, and the Canadian government spent all this money on basically influencing the legislative arena in Mongolia, the legal arena, on behalf of Canadian mining interests, and that's what Canadian aid in Mongolia was and is primarily about. Now, Mongolia, it's even more than just the aid policy, which is it's egregious that our aid policy is designed to advance mining companies. And as Stephen Brown points out, this is at the time when the World Bank was saying that Mongolia was too dependent on aid economically. So the World Bank's saying too much focus on aid. The Canadian government is using all its aid money to There's too much focus on mining. The Canadian government's spending all its aid money to expand mining in the country. In fact, Canada's whole diplomatic relations with Mongolia basically were set up to advance Canadian mining companies' interests. And I detailed this in my Black Book of Canadian Foreign Policy, and I'm doing a story kind of updating some of this based upon this recent article in the Journal of Development Studies. But back in 2008, the Canadian government establishes diplomatic relations, first of a trade office, then diplomatic relations with Mongolia. And basically the Financial Post, Robert Freeland, who's this prominent Canadian mining executive, former head of Ivanhoe, they begin pushing for more Canadian diplomatic representation. And the Financial Post pushes this for a couple years on behalf to better represent Canadian mining companies. They're very explicit about it, not hiding it at all. And then eventually in 2008, the Canadian government sets up diplomatic relations with Mongolia. And again, they're open. It's about advancing Canadian mining interests. So Canadian mining is an important part of Canadian foreign policy in many countries. In Mongolia, it's arguable that all of Canadian official policy in the country is really about mining companies, which is pretty remarkable. And it's also, this was all done in the context of Ivanhoe had this very controversial $6 billion mine that was considered like the top issue during the elections back in 2008. There was big protests. Robert Freeland had made this comment about how they can just dump their tailing ponds, and there's no NGOs, there's nobody who will like sort of oppose. So in the context of very controversial kind of statements from Canadian mining companies, lots of opposition locally, the Canadian government sets up diplomatic relations just to advance Canadian mining interests. With regards to Iran, basically the policy of regime change is got to the point, it's anybody, we're willing to back anybody. We saw that like 6 weeks ago when a whole bunch of MPs and senators spoke at this MEK, a group that used to be listed as a terrorist organization in Canada, spoke at their event in Toronto. Over the weekend, Melissa Lantsman, and who's the deputy head of the Conservative Party, and Pierre Poilievre, the head of the party, met with Crown Prince of Iran, Pahlavi Reza. I'm not sure if I'm getting that pronunciation correct. And he's the last of the monarchy that fled with the Iranian Revolution in 1979. And so Lantsman tweeted out, "Honored to meet the Crown Prince of Iran, Pahlavi Reza, about our commitment to help Iranian nation courageously fight for freedom. A productive meeting alongside leader Pierre Poilievre to reinforce our steadfast support as conservatives to ban the IRGC terrorists, apply additional sanctions, and amplify the voice of the revolution." So Canadian officials have gotten completely into bed with, the former Shah, the MEK that supported Iraq in the Iran-Iraq war, factions that have very little legitimacy within Iran. And it's basically, this is how far it's all gone with this regime change kind of campaigning that's going on by our government and in our political culture. Just today, Melanie Joly announced what she dubbed as the 10th sanction package against the regime since October. Okay, so there's the 10th sanction package. In the press release, they say that 147 Iranian individuals and 191 Iranian entities have now been sanctioned, I guess, over the past 6 months. And so this is a full-fledged kind of campaign, and again, there's lots legitimate criticism of the Iranian government, but this business of Canada sanctioning, which is probably a violation of international law. And obviously, the U.S. sanctions. Janet Yellen, yesterday or the day before, the head finance person in the Biden administration, she said that the sanctions in Iran have devastated Iran's economy, and then said the U.S. is going to put even more sanctions on. So this is known. It's had a huge impact. There's all kinds of there's medicines. Lots of deaths have been shown. Deaths due to lack of medicines that are being blocked from entering the country. But the Canadian government is, continuing down this path. The Globe and Mail had a story in the Saturday, a big long story in the Saturday Globe and Mail titled, "What Do Iranians Really Want?" New data collecting methods are finally challenging the West's long-held perception of Iran. So I read this with excitement. I was like, "Oh, is it going to show that 90% of Iranians, even if they don't like the regime, they don't like the sanctions, they want to end the devastating sanctions? Is it going to look at their opinion on Canada refusing to have diplomatic relations with Iran? So we have diplomatic relations with Saudi Arabia, more repressive, more patriarchal. We even sell them weapons, but then we don't have any diplomatic relations with Iran. Are they going to ask Iranians their opinion on that? No. What it's about is basically saying that there's these supposedly imperialist Western thinkers who have refuse to accept that Iranians aren't as religious as the regime tries to imply that they are, and basically it's the outsiders that are pushing this idea that Iranians are support the Iranian government because it's Shia, because it's theocracy, whatever. But really, it's basically inverting the power relation, which is the reality is this whole outside pressure saying that everyone in Iran hates the government, and this article was basically inverting that and saying that the outsiders are the ones that are saying that Iranians actually don't want to do anything to overthrow the government. So it's a continuation of this just completely one-sided view of everything, of what's going on in Iran, where it's the West, the sanctions we impose, they're just designed to bring democracy. They don't punish the population. They aren't designed to elicit opposition to overthrow the government, which is in fact explicitly what American sanctions are designed to do. But in fact, they're just about helping bring democracy. Also today, it was announced that Operation Impact, Canada's military mission in the Middle East, is going to be extended. Anita Anand said it's going to be extended to March 31st of 2025. Well, Operation Impact, it's much diminished than it was at its high point, which is about 800, I think a bit more than 800 troops, including significant numbers in Iraq. It's diminished. I don't know what it's down to. I think it's like 300 or 400 troops now. But part of what that was about was having troops in Iraq to undermine Iranian influence within Iraq, right? So we've had military presence, even if you go back to our role in Afghanistan, a variable, I don't think it's a central variable, but a variable was about having it, of course, Afghanistan borders Iran, and having influence over Iran by having troops on its border. So this is like a long-standing military policy, let alone sanctions, diplomatic, etc. Policy of Canada targeting the Iranian government, and not just government, but Iranian society. So
Israel committing the crime of apartheid? Mr. Trudeau, is Israel committing the crime of apartheid? Is Israel committing the crime of apartheid? Thank you for asking not to fall. But your government is supporting apartheid state. You keep saying, Mr. Trudeau, you keep saying, Mr. Trudeau, you keep saying, why did you hit me? Why did you hit me? Why did the RCMP? Why did the RCMP hit me? RCMP, you're walking my way. Hey, come on. Mr. Trudeau, is Israel committing the crime of apartheid? Is Israel committing the crime of apartheid? Thank you for asking not to fall. But your government is supporting apartheid state. You keep saying, Mr. Trudeau, you keep saying, Mr. Trudeau. RCMP, you're walking my way. Is Israel apartheid?
Sorry. Sorry, I hope that's yeah. So anyway, so I had a little trouble with trying to find how to get rid of that. But so that was, yeah, it was yesterday. That was Justin Trudeau walking away from an event that I attended. My plan was to ask him further about how his government has voted against UN resolutions upholding Palestinian rights, how it's held a pizza party for Canadians fighting in the Israeli military, signed a free trade agreement to expand the free trade agreement, or expanded the free trade agreement. He himself has said that Israel upholds Canadian values, and basically he loves Israel. The clip was pretty funny because, well, first of all, Trudeau waves at me. I'm the only person walking along. That was pretty funny. I had to run almost at full speed from half a block away when I saw him turning down the street. So I had to run really, really quick. And so as I'm kind of running alongside him, and then he makes this comment about making sure I don't trip over my feet. But yeah, anyways, I got kind of diverted from challenging, going more into the questions that I wanted to challenge him on, because the RCMP, well, they basically body checked me and turned me away from my my thought process. But anyway, so today, or a couple of days ago, there's a good article published titled "Canada Must Cancel Its Free Trade Agreement or Free Trade Deal with Israel." That's published by the CCPA Monitor by Stuart True and Stefan Christoph. There's a report. There's a big controversy over the Jewish Federations and the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs and Saturday's Globe and Mail. There's I guess a week ago, there was a criticism of the CJA and Jewish Federations by Andrew Cohen, who is a liberal Zionist. One of his family members was one of the founders of the Canadian Jewish Congress, and critic of Netanyahu, but still a liberal Zionist, still anti-Palestinian. And the Jewish Federations, the three of them, or maybe signed by all 12 of them, have this op-ed in the Globe, basically saying they're getting a lot of criticism for not speaking out on the protests that are challenging Netanyahu around the changes around the Supreme Court, and basically his threat to Jewish democracy, not to democracy in Israel, but to Jewish rights in Israel. And so they have this piece sort of defending themselves and saying, no, we can't really take a position because there's members of the Jewish community on all sides of this issue, et cetera, et cetera. Now, as is just been reported by a few different people on Twitter. In fact, the director of the Israel office for CIJA is like a hard line, like settler Netanyahu backer, and he just wrote that the Israeli government should, quote, strike while the iron is hot and implement policy change in concentrated fashion and plow through the chorus of international criticism. So despite monstrous protests in Israel, all waving Israeli flags and very much, IDF soldiers and whatever, the CIJA's person on the ground that heads up their office locally is one of the, is part of the far right kind of factions. So that's kind of an interesting development playing out. On a more a somber note, some people may be familiar with Father Robert Asselet, who is the co-founder of Canadian Friends of Sabile. He just passed away a couple of days ago, which is obviously very very sad. I didn't know him very well, but I worked with him and Karen Rodman of Just Peace Advocates and others on the No Canada on United Nations Security Council campaign, and specifically on the Palestine-focused element of that, which was probably the most influential part of it. He played, he helped out a lot with that. He played a big role in that little group we put together on that issue. On other news, with regards to China, it's just more of the China interference kind of stories just all over. There's a very good piece by Davide Mastrice in a passage titled "I Don't Trust Global News' Reporting on Handong," and he goes through just why that's the case. I agree with him. Today, Han Dong, that's the Liberal MP that's been accused of being an agent of China and then accused of having supposedly contacted the Israeli or the Chinese consulate to keep the two Michaels in jail. It's a global story a few days ago that the story makes no sense on the surface of it, and it almost certainly untrue, but it was used to force him out of the Liberal caucus. He has now announced, again, he just put out a statement earlier today, he's going to sue Global News. Sam Cooper, the person behind that, who's relaying these anonymous CSIS accusations left and right. He's somebody who, he wrote a whole book attacking China. He's somebody who he smeared 3 years ago a lawsuit by the Consortium News, U.S. international kind of left-wing U.S. international. They accused Consortium News of basically being Russian agents, and they sued Global in response to that. It was Cooper who was the person who relayed those accusations from the communications security establishment, just a partner organization of CSIS. So this is just more of these allegations. The Journal de Montréal had this article on Saturday, in the paper Saturday, about a rally that I attended the Sunday previous, and had a photo from the rally that was against the RCMP for having announced that they were investigating these two Chinese community groups for being like complicit in alleged Chinese police stations in Canada. And so, the RCMP announced this investigation. RCMP is obviously doing, innumerable number of investigations at every moment. They don't go and announce every investigation they're doing. They knew full well by announcing it would feed this whole anti-China, and whether anything came of the investigation, it would put in people's minds this perception of Chinese community groups being like agents of the Chinese government. But a week later, Le Journal de Montréal has this article about, which is completely bizarre. Why wouldn't they cover it the next day or maybe one day after that? They wait a whole week. And basically the whole angle of our article was not about the rally, but it was that the Senator Wu, that there was a senator that was complaining that this was like stoking, the RCMP was stoking xenophobia. So it was like the scandal that a senator, there was a speech, the senator actually didn't make it to the rally, but there was a speech read out by him at the rally. And it was like a scandal that the senator had basically come to the defense of these two. These are long-standing, they've been around for like decades. I know people who ran one of these organizations. And the scandal was the senator had like come to the defense of these community groups. Just all speaks to this incredible level of anti-China kind of hysteria. Trudeau on Friday described the need to have greater North American integration because of increasingly assertive China was the word Trudeau used. The words Anita Anand and Melanie Joly yesterday boasted about how Canada is sending 3 more naval vessels to China, to the South China Sea, more than previous. Now, as part of the Indo-Pacific strategy, we've upped the number of Canadian naval vessels, and they're openly boasting about sending more Canadian naval vessels halfway across the world, alongside American, to stoke conflict with China. I'm doing a piece basically on whether the NDP wants war with China. Because if you look at what the NDP is doing, everything they're doing is contributing to the climate that's moving us down. That is an actual possibility. The NDP is absolutely stoking this whole interference business. Jagmeet Singh immediately called for Han Dong to be removed from the Liberal caucus when his accusation came out from Global, even though it's almost for sure bullshit, like just total smear that he tried to keep the 2 Michaels in Chinese jail. It just makes no sense. And I go through a whole series of measures NDP has been pursuing for the last couple of years on stoking conflict with China. It's really pretty egregious stuff. So that was on yesterday at the Greek parade here in Montreal. If you look closely, Laurel, a regular on the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour, was right next to me. She ended up being right next to Trudeau. She was in the midst of trying to pull out her placard, and unfortunately didn't get out in time. We knew he was coming, but we didn't know exactly where he was going to appear and when he was going to appear. And he just sort of appears out of nowhere. And I had obviously a better speech prepared to a bit more historical context that I wanted to weave into what I said to him. But he heard it. He was like 5 or 6 feet away from me. He heard the bit about the opposing the NATO proxy war. But this is, we're continuing this strategy. The Foreign Minister Joly explicitly said that she said the peace talks that China is proposing are just going to prolong the war. So China's proposal to have a truce and then have peace talks, that's just going to prolong the war, because Russia's still going to have some of Ukrainian territory, and it's just going to, they're going to rearm and later on. And of course, she's recently said that Canada's position is we want regime change in Moscow. There's a very good article, definitely worth a read, in the Journal of Military and Strategic Studies. Just came out. It's titled "Now or Never: The Immediate Origins of Putin's Preventative War on Ukraine." So it's a very academic article. It's an academic journal, and it just looks at just how many efforts there were around the question of NATO expansion, around the Minsk peace agreement, around how there was an escalation in early 2019. The Ukrainians may put it in their constitution that they had to join NATO, and then Zelensky never backed away from that. And then some of the stuff with Zelensky and threatening to get nuclear weapons, and then the British offering in mid 2021, offering naval support, and just goes through all of the months before Russia invaded, and shows just without a doubt, without an absolute doubt, the business of this being unprovoked is complete madness. It's clearly provoked. Now, again, it's brutal, it's illegal what Russia's done, but the geopolitical context that the U.S. primarily, but Canada and others had pushed is just absolutely clear. Of they were pushing aggressive policy. The article is really, it's worth a read. It's a bit long, but it's worth a read. Now, a couple days ago, Anita Anand, as part of the Joe Biden visit, Anita Anand announced $1.4 billion to expand the Canadian Special Forces base, Dwyer Hill, I believe it's called, just outside of Ottawa. And of course, Canadian Special Forces are secretive. That's part of their appeal from the government's perspective. They deploy them and they don't tell us about them. They're also, of course, elite forces. And so they're clearly a threat to democracy, but they're putting a bunch more money into expanding their capacities. And JTF2, the elite of the elite special forces, only began in 1993. The Canadian Special Forces Command only began in 2006. And now it's more than 2,500. So it's just been increasing quite steadily. And they've been deployed. They're almost certainly in Ukraine right now. They've been deployed, in Haiti in multiple occasions, to oust Aristide in 2004, 2019. We had video evidence of that, obviously, and they played a big role in Afghanistan, in Iraq, Libya, contrary to UN resolution, Libya, Peru, we have Colombia, there's evidence that they were deployed, and they're presumably being deployed to many places that we don't know about. There's just little bits of information that seeps out. Now, interestingly enough, apparently this decision was made like 4 months ago, but they only announced it while Biden was in Ottawa. And this gets to a kind of an interesting element of Canadian foreign policy, military policy, which is that basically they wanted to hype up how much they're contributing to the military. There is no country, or there are very few countries in the world that one of the main things they push another country to do on their border is to increase their military spending, right? Most countries don't want the country on their border to increase their military spending because that could potentially be a threat, or it could potentially be defensive and stop their ability to potentially invade the other country. But in the case of Canada, the US is constantly asking for Canada to spend more money on its military. And part of the reason why is because they know that every added dollar to the Canadian military is an added dollar to the American empire, directly in that the Canadian military is structured to fight alongside the US globally, and also because often the dollars literally go to US arms manufacturers and their Canadian subsidiaries that are, branch plants of the within Canada. Alongside the Biden's visit, they announced more money for NORAD and a tighter timeline for expanding NORAD or upgrading NORAD. They announced $7.3 billion to upgrade the facilities for the F-35. So we need to spend $7.3 billion in just improving the bases to be able to have the F-35s from the on the Canadian military bases. That doesn't count all of the money that's going to be plowed. Billions, tens of billions are going to be plowed into the F-35s. So this is just significant announcements. A lot of this has already kind of been floating around, but with Biden here, the Liberals want to really show how they're doing their part on behalf of NATO and the U.S. empire. And this gets to the final issue I want to talk about, which is the Biden visit. And honestly, the Biden visit was very depressing, very shocking. You had Elizabeth May giving him chocolate. You had Jagmeet Singh and Charlie Angus saying he's a working class hero. You had the head of the Assembly of First Nations taking a selfie with Biden and how great Biden is. You had the head of Unifor, Lana Payne Union, saying how we're got another working class hero. You had standing ovations. It looks like, I'm not sure about this, all the NDP MPs, I think, gave standing ovations. I mean, the only opposition, to the extent there was sort of opposition, was from like a Trumpian Conservative Party. They wanted to play like a sort of Trumpian base of the Conservative Party. And you had like Pierre Poilievre saying he might not go to the dinner, or kind of act like he didn't get a invite to the dinner. And then you had the thing at Andrew Scheer, who wasn't clapping hard enough for Biden, and all these liberals were like mocking him, and some of the Conservative MPs wouldn't stand up apparently for Biden when we talked about how both cabinets have 50% women, and Biden kind of lectured some of the Conservative MPs. So this is where we're at. I mean, this is where official left-wing Canadian politics is that you got to celebrate Joe Biden. The day before he came, of course, he bombed Syria. Part of his visit was to pressure Canada to take a bigger imperial role in Haiti. Canada announced $100 million for the Haitian police during the visit. I talked to Bianca about this, that we should have about a week ago before the visit, saying we should have done we brought up the idea of doing an action alert, and the action alert was just targeting at NDP MPs, asking them, because I knew this was what was going to happen, asking them just to not stand. Just don't give him a standing ovation, okay? We're not calling for you to heckle him. Like, they should, of course, heckle him. They should, bring out a sign or whatever, but just don't stand. Don't give the guy a unanimous standing ovation, House of Commons. But it seems like they did. A few decades ago, Sven Robinson, when Ronald Reagan spoke in Parliament, Sven Robinson, and then NDP MP, heckled him 3 times. So there is some tradition of not just acquiescing to whatever the U.S. president is saying, but unfortunately, that's where we're at. I mean, there was a rally in Ottawa. It was good. There was 40, 50 people. It's good that happened. I wasn't able to go, but there's official left politics. I mean, part of it is he's not Donald Trump, right? Biden's not Donald Trump. Part of it is that it's like wartime. Canada is at war with Russia, and there's a whole climate that frames this whole thing. U.S. is all good. Alongside that is this China stuff and ramping that up, and another kind of sentiment of like going to war. And part of it is just the grip that the U.S. empire has over Canadian political outlook, but it's pretty grim. So yeah, it's good there was a rally in Ottawa, as small as it was. Better to have something than not. Here in Montreal, there was a rally on the Friday while Biden was in Ottawa at the U.S. consulate, about 100 people, mostly from the Haitian community, that rallied against foreign intervention or U.S. Canadian imperialism in Haiti and the core group. This week there's a few other signs of positive. Like just today on Toronto Metropolitan University, they didn't. The IDF lieutenant colonel was supposed to speak on campus, and it got canceled. It seems like the student organizers, with protests being planned and all these emails that were sent in recent days complaining about it, they seem to have canceled that. On Friday also there was a rally at McGill on Palestine, 60 or 70 people. Today and over the weekend there was some rallies across the country on Canada's role in the sending weapons to Yemen or to the Saudis to fight in Yemen and to mark the 8th anniversary of the war there. So there's some dissent, anti-war kind of dissent floating around, but honestly, the Biden visit was a very grim moment in Canadian recent Canadian political history. I'll leave it there. I have to be off at a hard 7, but if people have comments and questions, go ahead. I'm gonna go ahead, Jake. I think I've unmuted you.
Yes, I want to make just a small, very short comment about MP Han Dong, but then I have a question about Iran. MP Han Dong, he's my MP in my area, and for the last 2 years or so, I used to send him regularly emails about the atrocities of Israel, and slowly, him and his assistants became very, very interested. They basically did not know anything about the truth, what's happening. And then, to make it short, they gave me an appointment with him about a week and a half ago at 2 o'clock in his office. That was the night before that the first time it came out about him and China connection. And when I went there, his assistant came out, he said, I'm terribly sorry. He had to go for emergency because of something happened to his kid. Of course, I understood what's going on, that he doesn't have now the time to deal with me and about Palestinians. And we left it for some time in the future. Now, my question about Iran is, do you think that very soon Israel or Netanyahu both will attack Iran? For the same, I think that is for sure, because Netanyahu in the last few weeks was going around to UK, France, US, and so on, preparing and talking about Iran. Blinken was in Israel 2 weeks ago talking about Iran, and the ambassador in Israel, a US ambassador, said, we think that Israel should do whatever he thinks should be done with Iran, and will back him up, will not interfere, but will back him up. So, because every time that was an assault on any, on Gaza or West Bank or anything else, other countries, it was always 3 months before election. And this time Netanyahu may do it to save his skin, that the revolt against him will lessen. Do you think it is possible?
Yeah, I think it's definitely possible. I mean, the Netanyahu is clearly, they've been sort of at this low-level war with Iran for a long time, assassinating Iranian scientists and blowing up all kinds of different things. Yeah, that seems possible. I would also imagine it's would help or could help Netanyahu with regards to the internal problems within Israeli society. And Israel is bombing. I mean, the stuff from Israel bombing Aleppo's airport, constantly bombing Aleppo's airport, even twice now since their terrible earthquake. And it's all justified. They justify it all as targeting Iranian targets. And same thing with the Americans bombing in Iran or in Syria recently about, Iranian proxies and all this kind of stuff. So they have clearly set the stage for that to be, legitimated. But whether what that will look like and whether that will happen, I don't really know. But yeah, it's definitely seems like a possibility. Go ahead, Laurel.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know how many people on this call live in Montreal, but if you do and you're willing to come out to actions, would you get in touch with me? Because we really need to have a bigger movement than we've got. And I'll give you my email address here. It's the word transparence. I use this address for another group that I was in. transparence2020@gmail.com.
Can you post it in the chat, Laurel?
Yeah, I can. Sorry. Right. I'll do that. But please, if you live in Montreal, get in touch with me. We need to build the anti-war movement here. We get visitors all the time who need to be hassled. And as many people as possible to come out would be really, really good. It would really help us. Thanks.
We after the first thing with Trudeau at this rally, at this Greek parade on Sunday, Laurel and I, we had a plan that she was going to try to like walk. Trudeau was on top of the like a stage pretty high up, and all these people were kind of like filing by, and she had her sign, and she was going to cross the road and try to get kind of next to him so I could take a photo of her sign sort of with Trudeau in the background. And just as she went to walk across the street, this like RCMP undercover out of nowhere just like grabbed her. He clearly been watching us, and we weren't aware. But anyway, we need more if we're gonna be successful at these parades and different events. It's better to have 6 or 10 or 20 or 100 people than 2 people. Go ahead, Gregory.
Right. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, just the regarding the Biden visit and Trudeau, don't you think the love fest, I mean, with BRICS, with China bringing Saudi Arabia and Iran together, the empire is collapsing all around them. So it seems to me they had to have this love fest to kind of bolster each other. They are in so much serious trouble. I think that, if they didn't do this, the United States is becoming more and more isolated. So is Canada. And, I think the global South has written off the West. So do you see any possibility that maybe what's happening?
Yeah, I mean, I think that might be an element in it. I don't know. I wouldn't go too far with some of that. I find sometimes reading some of the kind of like left-wing geopolitical analysis that it's a bit more of like what I would want to have happen than what is actually happening. So I always be a little bit cautious with that. Like, there's no doubt that, China's economic rise is clear. China still has a GDP per capita of like a fifth of the US, but it's 5 times as big as the country. So, right. But so China's economic rise is real. It's significant, and the success it had with the overseeing the recent Saudi Iranian restarting of diplomatic relations. The fact that while Russia has, I think, been done very poorly from a military standpoint, the fact that NATO hasn't been able to isolate Russia economically, I think that's a sign of weakness to a certain extent from the US and the G7. But there's at the same time, if you look at like what Americans have been able to do with regards to like bases in Philippines. The alliance is getting Japan to increase its military spending, getting the AUKUS Accord with Australia. They've been able to put together a pretty good alliance or network of countries to engage in the containment of China, right? In case of Australia, it's really from an economic standpoint, it doesn't make much sense for Australia's perspective, even from the standpoint from Japan. So I wouldn't go, yes, I think there is, the US empire is weakening in many different ways. I think there's no doubt about that. But also, you look at, like Haiti is an interesting example, right? Haiti's, they haven't been able to get their UN resolution. The reason there hasn't been the foreign mission in Haiti is because they haven't got the UN resolution, because China and Russia haven't gone along, right, at the Security Council. So even like right in the backyard, the real backyard of the US, where the US has been so powerful, not able to, get exactly what it wants. But yeah, so I was a little bit cautious with some of that stuff. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? We're not quite at 7, but I actually should get off as soon as possible. So if there's no other comments or questions, same place, same time next week, and have a good evening. Thank you, everyone.